She nearly froze on Christmas Eve, until she begged the rancher to let her stay as his wife. The snow had been falling since the afternoon, but by evening it had turned into a heavy storm. The wind pushed the snow across the empty road, covering old tracks and making everything look the same, white, quiet, and endless. The sky was dark, and the air felt sharp enough to sting the skin. On that lonely road, far away from any town, a young woman walked slowly, pulling her thin coat tighter around her body. Her name was Emily. She had been walking for hours. At first, she thought she would find a bus stop, a small store, or maybe a house where she could ask for help. But the road kept stretching ahead, and the storm kept getting worse. Her shoes were wet, her hands were numb, and her legs felt weak from the cold and exhaustion. Every step became harder than the last. Emily had never imagined her life would come to this. Just a few months earlier, she had been living in a small apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, and her own. She worked at a local cafe, earning enough to pay rent and buy groceries. Her life was simple, but she was proud of her independence. She believed that as long as she worked hard, things would slowly get better. Then the cafe closed without warning. The owner had apologized, saying business had been falling for months. Emily searched for another job, but winter was coming, and many places were cutting staff instead of hiring. Her savings disappeared quickly, first for rent, then for food, then for transportation as she traveled across the city looking for work. When she couldn't pay the rent anymore, she had to leave her apartment. At first, she stayed with a coworker for a few days, then at a cheap motel using the last of her money. After that, she had nowhere left to go. She thought about calling distant relatives, but she hadn't spoken to them in years. Pride and fear kept her silent. She kept telling herself she would find work soon, that this situation was only temporary, but days turned into weeks. As Christmas came closer, the city felt colder in more ways than one. Shops were full of lights and decorations, and people hurried home to their families. Emily watched them from sidewalks and bus stops, feeling invisible. She spent nights in shelters when she could find space, and sometimes she simply stayed awake, walking to keep warm. Then someone at a shelter mentioned seasonal work at farms outside the city. It was her last hope. Emily took a bus as far as her remaining money allowed and then started walking toward the rural area where she had heard there might be work. She believed if she could reach a farm or ranch, she could ask for a job, even if it was just temporary. She was willing to do anything, cleaning, cooking, feeding animals, whatever would give her a place to stay. But she had misjudged the distance, and she had not expected the storm. Now, on Christmas Eve, she found herself alone on a quiet country road with darkness falling and snow rising around her. The wind pushed against her like a wall, making it hard to breathe. Her fingers had lost feeling, and her feet felt heavy and stiff. She tried to keep moving because stopping meant getting colder. Her thoughts began to slow, and fear started to grow inside her. What if there were no houses nearby? What if she couldn't make it through the night? She shook her head, trying to stay focused. She couldn't give up. She had come too far to stop now. For a long time, all she could see was the white road and dark fields on both sides. Then, through the falling snow, she noticed something faint in the distance. A light? At first, she thought she was imagining it, but as she walked a little farther, the light became clearer. It was coming from a house sitting far back from the road, surrounded by open land and a wooden fence. A narrow path led toward it, almost hidden under the snow. Hope gave her the strength to move faster. Her legs trembled as she crossed the field, the cold wind hitting her from every side. By the time she reached the porch, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely lift them. For a moment she hesitated, What if the person inside didn't trust strangers? What if they told her to leave? But she knew she had no choice. She knocked. At first, there was no response. The wind howled around the house, and Emily felt panic rising in her chest. Breath. She knocked again, this time harder. After a few long seconds, she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly. A tall man stood there, looking surprised and cautious. He appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed in work clothes, with tired eyes and a serious expression. Behind him, the warm light from inside the house spilled onto the snowy porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke.
Emily realized how she must look, pale, wet, and shivering uncontrollably.
"Please," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry to bother you." "I was caught in the storm. I just need a warm place to stay for the night." "I won't cause any trouble." His expression didn't soften right away. He looked past her towards the empty field, then back at her face. It was clear he wasn't used to strangers showing up at his door. Emily lowered her eyes, afraid he might refuse. "I can leave in the morning," she added quickly. I can't stay outside tonight." The wind blew harder, pushing snow across the porch. Emily's teeth began to chatter, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. The man's eyes moved to her hands, which had turned red from the cold. He remained silent for a few seconds, that felt much longer. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come inside," he said quietly. Break. Relief washed over her so suddenly that her knees almost gave way.
"Thank you," she whispered.
She stepped into the house, and the warmth hit her immediately. It felt almost unreal after hours in the freezing air. The door closed behind her, shutting out the sound of the storm. The house was simple but clean, with wooden floors, a small fireplace, and the quiet feeling of a place where only one person lived. Pond. The man handed her a towel and pointed toward a chair near the fire. "Sit," he said. "You need to warm up." Emily nodded, too grateful to speak. As she sat near the fire, holding her hands close to the warmth, she felt the first small sense of safety she had experienced in weeks. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the land. But for the first time that night, she believed she might make it through. The warmth of the fire slowly began to chase away the cold that had wrapped Emily's body for hours. She sat near it, rubbing her hands together, trying to restore some feeling to her frozen fingers. The man, Daniel, as she would soon learn, moved quietly around the room, setting down a pot of hot soup on the wooden table. The smell of broth and vegetables made her stomach growl. She realized she hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. Daniel didn't rush her or ask unnecessary questions, but he simply nodded toward the chair and said, "Eat." Emily thanked him softly and picked up the spoon, grateful that he hadn't demanded an explanation or judged her for appearing at his door in such a state. As she ate, she glanced around the room. The house was small but well kept. A few simple decorations hinted at someone who valued practicality more than luxury. A worn leather chair sat near the fireplace, and a stack of firewood rested neatly against the wall. A small wooden table had a few plates and cups, each one clean. Everything seemed orderly, and yet it had a lived-in warmth that made her feel safe for the first time in days. Daniel watched her quietly, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Break. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, and his hands showed the signs of hard work, calloused and strong. His face was serious, with a few lines around the eyes that suggested a life full of responsibility. Didn't smile easily, and yet there was a calmness about him, a quiet strength that made Emily feel slightly reassured.
After she finished eating,
Emily felt a wave of shame wash over her.
She didn't want to seem helpless or like a burden. She put down the spoon and said softly, "I shouldn't trouble you. I can leave in the morning."
Daniel shook his head slowly.
Breath. It's a storm. Roads are buried in snow.
You're not going anywhere tonight. Sit by the fire and warm up.
Bass. Emily nodded, grateful, but her mind raced. She had always been independent. The idea of relying on someone else, especially a stranger, made her feel nervous and awkward. But she had no choice. Outside, the wind howled, snow piling against the walls like a solid wall. She would freeze if she tried to leave now. She shifted in her chair, warming her hands by the fire. Daniel moved to a nearby shelf and pulled down a blanket. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Wrap yourself up." It was thick and heavy, soft in a way that made her forget, even if only for a moment, the harsh storm outside. She wrapped it around her shoulders and sat quietly, feeling her fingers slowly regain warmth. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the wind pressing against the house. Emily tried to steady her breathing and calm her racing thoughts. She had been walking for so long that exhaustion made it hard to think clearly, but she couldn't let herself drift into sleep just yet. She was still on edge, still unsure if this man would simply ask her to leave once she had warmed up. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice calm but careful. "You're far from anywhere. How did you end up walking in this storm?"
Emily swallowed and looked down at her hands.
She didn't want to tell her full story. Not all at once. It was private, and it still felt too raw. But she couldn't lie. I
was trying to find work, she said quietly. I left the city. I had nowhere else to go.
Daniel's expression didn't change much, but Emily sensed he was listening. She continued, "I lost my job a few weeks ago."
My apartment! I couldn't pay the rent anymore. I thought I could find something out here.
"I didn't know it would snow like this." Her voice cracked slightly, and she looked away, embarrassed by her vulnerability. Daniel studied her quietly. He didn't interrupt, and that silence gave her a strange comfort. He wasn't pushing her for details or judging her. Instead, he seemed to be weighing her words, trying to understand her situation. "You've been walking a long time," he said finally. "You're lucky you found this place when you did. You might not have lasted the night out there."
Emily nodded, shivering slightly as the blanket slipped around her shoulders.
She wanted to thank him, to explain how desperate she had been, but the words felt too small for what she was feeling. Instead, she simply sat and let the warmth of the fire fill her senses. Daniel went about his chores quietly. He fed the animals, checked the wood supply, and made sure the fireplace kept burning steadily. Emily watched him work, noticing the rhythm of his movements, the careful way he handled every task. There was a familiarity to the work, a deep connection to the land and animals that he had obviously lived with for years. She admired it quietly, thinking about how different her own life had been. Always moving, always uncertain, always chasing the next step. After a while, Daniel returned to the room and brought another blanket, placing it over the back of a chair near her. "You'll need this if you stay awake. Nights get cold here," he said.
Emily smiled faintly, a small spark of hope forming. She realized that she didn't just want to survive the night anymore. She wanted to understand the life she had stumbled into.
Breath. There was something steady and calm about this place, something she hadn't felt in months. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, but inside The house felt like a small refuge. Emily and Daniel talked quietly, sharing small details about themselves. Emily spoke of her love for reading, the small joys of baking, and memories of her childhood winters. Daniel, though reserved, shared stories of the ranch, of the animals he cared for, and the challenges of living alone in the countryside. There was a cautious curiosity in their conversation, a slow building of trust. Emily felt herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. She laughed quietly at a story Daniel told about a stubborn mule, and he chuckled in return. It was a strange, comforting feeling to connect with someone after so many days of loneliness. But as the evening deepened, Emily began to realize the storm wasn't just a physical danger, it had also been a turning point for her. Until now, she had been running, trying to survive from one place to another, constantly fearing that she would fail. But here, in this quiet house, she saw a chance to pause, to catch her breath, and maybe even find a place where she could belong, at least temporarily. Daniel, for his part, watched her carefully. He wasn't used to visitors, and he had lived alone for years. Yet there was something about Emily, her honesty, her resilience, the quiet dignity with which she carried her desperation, that made him reconsider his initial hesitation. He didn't know how long she would stay or what her future held, but he felt a small pull to help her, at least until the storm passed. That night, Emily lay on a small bed Daniel had prepared, wrapped in warm blankets. She thought about the strange turn of events that had brought her here. Just hours earlier, she had been on the verge of despair, unsure if she would survive the night. But now, she was safe, warm, and even a little hopeful. Sleep came slowly, but it came. For the first time in a long while, she dreamed not of running or surviving, but of finding a life where she could rest, belong, and maybe even heal. Outside, the wind continued to howl and snow piled high against the walls, but inside, the small house offered something more than shelter. It offered the possibility of a new beginning, the first glimmer of hope in a long, cold winter. And as Emily drifted into sleep, she realized that sometimes, even in the darkest, coldest nights, a single act of kindness, from a stranger, from fate, or from life itself, could change everything. The next morning, Emily woke to the soft light of winter's sun filtering through the small window. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sound of Daniel moving in the other room. The storm had slowed, but the roads outside were still covered in deep snow. Emily sat up slowly, stretching her stiff muscles, and realized just how tired she had been. For the first time in days, she felt some strength returning to her body. Daniel appeared in the doorway with a mug of warm tea.
Here, he said, drink this before you start moving around too much.
You'll need the warmth. His voice was calm, steady, and without judgment. Emily accepted the cup with a grateful smile. The tea was soothing, and the gentle warmth spreading through her hands made her feel almost human again after the night spent shivering.
Thank you, she said quietly.
I don't know how to repay you for letting me stay. She didn't want to feel like a burden. Daniel shook his head. It's just a storm. You needed shelter. That's all. Emily nodded, but couldn't stop the small flicker of worry that grew in her chest. She had no money, no home, and nowhere to go once the storm cleared. The thought made her uneasy. Desperate, she didn't want to rely on Daniel for longer than she had to, but she also knew she couldn't survive alone in the cold. After breakfast, Daniel suggested she help with a few small chores inside the house. It was mostly tidying up, bringing in firewood, and checking the stove. Emily was eager to help. She wanted to show that she wasn't weak or helpless, that she could contribute in some way. Her hands still shook from the cold, but she felt a spark of purpose that she hadn't felt in weeks. As the day went on, Emily began to notice the rhythm of life on the ranch. She watched Daniel feed the animals, checking the water troughs and inspecting the fences. He worked with a quiet intensity, moving with experience and care. It was obvious this land had been his life for many years. Emily realized that if she stayed here, even temporarily, she could learn skills she had never had before, skills that required patience, strength, and dedication. When Daniel suggested she try helping with the chores outside, Emily hesitated. Breath. Snow was still deep, and the morning air bit sharply at her cheeks. But she didn't want to appear weak, so she followed him outside, wrapping herself in the extra blankets he had provided. Together they shoveled snow from the pathways, fed the animals, and checked the fences for damage. Emily was surprised by how tiring the work was. Every movement felt heavy at first, but gradually her body adjusted. She began to understand why Daniel moved with such efficiency. Years of living and working on the ranch had taught him endurance, patience, and focus. Emily realized she was learning more than just chores. She was learning resilience, too. By midday, the storm had eased and the sun peeked through the clouds, reflecting off the snow in blinding brightness. Emily felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet beauty of the landscape made her feel small, but also strangely connected to the world around her. The trees, the animals, the open fields, it all seemed to whisper a simple truth. Life goes on, and even in hardship there is something to hold on to. During a break, Emily sat on a snow-covered log near the barn. She watched Daniel work, admiring his dedication and quiet strength. He noticed her gaze and gave a small nod, almost acknowledging her thoughts without words.
For the first time, Emily felt comfortable enough to speak openly. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said quietly, more to herself than to him.
I never imagined life could feel this calm. Even after everything that's happened, this feels like a place where I might belong, even for a little while. He continued working, but Emily could tell he was listening. After a few moments, he said, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Emily nodded, tears forming in her eyes despite the cold. Breath. "Yes! I didn't plan for any of this." Breakup. I thought I had control over my life, and then it all slipped away. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I just kept moving, hoping something would change. I never expected kindness from a stranger, or to find a place like this, perhaps. Daniel stopped for a moment and looked at her. There was a quiet understanding in his gaze. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons we don't expect," he said. "Sometimes it's harsh. Sometimes it's gentle. But it's always moving forward. You can either fight it alone or let it guide you." Emily thought about his words. She realized he was right. Right. She had been fighting alone for so long, relying only on herself. But now, here, she could feel the possibility of help, of support, without shame. The thought was strange, but comforting. As the afternoon passed, Emily began helping more around the house. She chopped small pieces of firewood, helped Daniel with repairs, and even learned how to prepare a simple meal for the animals. Daniel guided her patiently, showing her the correct way to handle tools and feed the livestock. Emily was grateful for his instruction and careful attention. She realized that this work, although exhausting, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. During a quiet moment, as the sun began to set and the snow reflected the golden light, Emily sat near the fireplace again. Daniel joined her, placing a cup of warm tea in her hands. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the fire crackle and pop. "I have nowhere else to go," Emily admitted softly, almost whispering. "I don't want to overstay my welcome. I I don't know what I would do if I had to leave now. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. You don't have to leave, he said finally. Not yet.
Desk, let the storm pass. Let things settle, and we'll figure it out.
Emily felt a mixture of relief and hesitation. She didn't want to impose, yet she felt a growing sense of trust toward this man who had offered her safety without question.
For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have a place where she didn't have to constantly worry about survival. As night fell, the temperature dropped again, but the house remained warm. But Emily helped prepare dinner, learning small tasks in the kitchen under Daniel's quiet guidance. They shared a simple meal together, and Emily noticed a subtle change in their interaction. It wasn't formal or distant anymore. It was companionable, comfortable, and grounded in a shared understanding of work, survival, and human decency. After dinner, Emily helped clear the dishes and tidy up. She felt exhausted but satisfied. There was a rhythm to this life that, although new to her, felt grounding and real. She realized that she didn't just want to survive here. She wanted to belong. Later, as they sat by the fire, Emily admitted something she hadn't said out loud before.
I wish I could stay longer, she said quietly.
Brie, even if it's just to help.
I can't go back to being alone. Ejected from Wassa.
He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, If you want to stay, you can. But it's not easy.
Life here is hard work, and it won't always be comfortable. You'll have to prove yourself, and even then, it won't be permanent unless we both decide it is.
She wasn't afraid of work. She wasn't afraid of effort. She was afraid of rejection, of being turned away after finding the first safety she had known in weeks. But she also knew that if she didn't try, she would have nowhere to go when the winter became harsher. I'll do whatever it takes, she said firmly. I want a chance to stay. That's all I ask.
Daniel studied her again.
There was a long silence, filled only by the crackling fire and the occasional sound of snow hitting the roof. Then he nodded. All right, he said. You can stay.
We'll see how it goes. But remember, this isn't a charity.
You'll have to contribute, and you'll have to respect this place. Can you do that? I can, Emily said, determination in her voice.
I promise. That night, as she lay under the warm blankets in the small bed Daniel had prepared, Emily felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. She had a chance. Not a guaranteed future, but a chance. And sometimes, that was enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, but inside, the house was a sanctuary. Emily realized that life had a way of surprising people, of offering unexpected refuge when it was needed most. She drifted off to sleep with a small spark of hope, not just for survival, but for belonging, for trust, and for a life that could slowly begin to feel like home. Days turned into weeks. Emily had settled into a routine on the ranch, and slowly the house that had seemed so quiet and empty began to feel alive. She woke early each morning to help Daniel with chores, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, and clearing snow from the paths. At first, the work had been exhausting, but her muscles grew stronger and she became more confident with each task. She discovered she could do more than she had ever imagined, and with Daniel guiding her, she began to understand the rhythm of life on the ranch. Daniel, for his part, watched her carefully. He had lived alone for years and was not used to sharing his space or his work. At first, he had been cautious, unsure how to feel about a stranger suddenly becoming a part of his life. But Emily was not just a visitor. She was diligent, careful, and respectful. She never complained, even when the chores were hard, and she learned quickly. There was something about her that he couldn't ignore. Her quiet determination, her willingness to try, even when she was tired or cold. As the days passed, the walls between them began to break down, not with words, but with small, shared moments. Emily would hand him tools as he worked, and he would teach her the right way to care for the animals. They began to talk more about their pasts, sharing stories bit by bit. Daniel spoke of his wife, who had passed many years ago, leaving him alone with the ranch. His voice carried a soft sadness that Emily felt she could understand, even if she didn't know him well yet. Emily shared her own hardships, telling him how she had lost her apartment, struggled to find work, and wandered for days in the snow before finding his house. Daniel listened without judgment, and that alone made her feel safe. One evening after a long day of work, Emily and Daniel sat together near the fireplace. The storm had cleared, leaving a bright, cold night outside with stars glittering against the dark sky. Emily wrapped herself in a blanket, her fingers still slightly chilled from the evening air. She looked at Daniel, noticing how calm he seemed, how steady his presence was. After weeks of surviving alone, she realized how much she had begun to depend on the stability he provided. Not in a weak way, but in a way that gave her hope. "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly, almost afraid to speak the words. "I know I can help here, but
I don't want to overstay my welcome." She paused, then added, "I don't have anywhere else to go."
And I don't want to go back to being alone.
Her voice trembled slightly, but there was honesty in her words.
Great. Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. His thoughts seemed far away. Emily waited, her heart beating faster. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she could feel that he was considering her carefully. She had spent so many nights alone wishing for a safe place that now, finally, she had a chance to ask something more, something she had never imagined asking before. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Daniel, I know this may sound strange, but
Would you let me stay here as your wife?" The words rushed out before she could stop them.
breaths.
She didn't mean it lightly. She wasn't asking for comfort or charity.
She wanted a home, a place where she could belong, and a life that didn't feel so lonely. The request hung in the air, heavy and shocking in its honesty. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. He leaned back, silent for a long moment. He didn't move, didn't speak, and Emily felt her stomach tighten. She had never seen anyone look so serious. Fear began to creep into her mind. Had she gone too far? Would he ask her to leave immediately? She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting in the blanket, unsure if she had made a mistake. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice calm but measured. "Emily, that's not a small thing to ask." His eyes met hers, serious and thoughtful.
Marriage?
"Bae,
It's a lifetime. It's not just about having a place to stay.
it's about trust, respect, and understanding. You're asking for a lot." Emily nodded quickly. "I know," she said softly.
I'm not asking for an answer right now. I had to ask.
Buying.
I don't want to leave, Daniel. I want to stay. Not as someone who is helpless, but as someone who is part of this life, who can help and be
A companion. I'll do the work. I'll earn my place. I promise. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance. Daniel remained silent for a long time. He was used to thinking carefully, used to making decisions that affected the ranch and his life. He had spent years alone, and the idea of marriage, of letting someone into his life permanently, was almost unimaginable. And yet, when he looked at Emily, He saw more than desperation or need. He saw resilience. He saw someone who had survived hardship, who had worked hard without complaint, and who had quietly become part of his world. He thought about the weeks they had spent together. The early mornings, the long hours of work, the small conversations by the fire. He realized that, in his own way, he had grown to rely on her presence as well. The house had felt empty before, but now it felt alive, warm, and shared. There was a connection, subtle but undeniable, that had formed between them. I need time, he said finally. I can't answer this right away. Marriage. It's not something I decide on lightly. You're asking me to trust someone again, to open my life. I haven't done that in a long time. Emily nodded, relief mixing with anxiety. I understand, she said. I don't need an answer tonight.
I just wanted to be honest. I wanted you to know how I feel and what I want.
I can stay here. I can help. And I can wait. I just hope you'll consider it.
Desperation. Daniel studied her closely. There was a seriousness in her eyes, a quiet determination that matched his own work ethic. She wasn't asking out of desperation alone. She was asking out of sincerity, and he could sense that.
All right, he said finally after a long pause.
We'll take it slowly. You can stay, help, and be part of this life. But marriage, that decision, it will take time. We'll see how it goes. We'll get to know each other better, understand what we both need, and then we'll decide. Can you agree to that? Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She smiled, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Yes, she said softly. I can wait. I can do that. From that moment on, their relationship changed. It wasn't about desperation or need anymore. It was about choice.
Emily continued her work on the ranch, and Daniel began to see her not just as a guest or someone needing help, but as a partner in daily life.
They shared small joys, laughing at a stubborn mule, enjoying a meal together, or simply sitting quietly by the fire. Each day built trust, each chore completed together strengthened their bond. Yet, Emily never forgot the seriousness of her request. She worked diligently, always mindful of Daniel's trust and the unspoken agreement between them. She wasn't simply living on the ranch. She was contributing to it, learning it, becoming a part of it, and slowly, Daniel began to see her in a new light, not as someone who arrived on his porch during a storm, but as someone who had chosen to be part of his life and who had proven she belonged. The days passed quietly but meaningfully. Emily learned more about Daniel's world and the care it required. She began to anticipate his needs, help before being asked, and share in the small decisions of the ranch. Daniel, who had spent years alone, began to appreciate her presence in ways he hadn't expected. The bond between them deepened, not through grand gestures, but through trust, effort, and shared life. But Emily realized that asking to stay as his wife had been a risk, but it had been worth it. It wasn't about forcing a decision or expecting immediate answers. It was about honesty and courage. And as Daniel considered her words, as he watched her grow into this life, he knew that sometimes love and trust began quietly, in small, steady steps. That winter evening, as the fire burned low and the wind whispered against the windows, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known for months. She had asked for something she truly wanted, faced uncertainty with courage, and discovered that honesty could open doors she hadn't even imagined. And Daniel, sitting across from her, began to understand that life had a way of giving second chances, not just in survival, but in love, trust, and companionship. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, but the ranch remained a quiet, steady place. Emily had settled fully into her new role. She woke early every morning to help Daniel with the chores, tending to the animals, feeding the chickens, and checking the fences. Breaths. Every day, she felt stronger and more capable. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it gave her a sense of purpose she had not experienced in years. Daniel watched her quietly, noticing the subtle changes. Breaths. She moved with confidence now, her hands steady, her steps sure, and her voice calm. She no longer seemed like the desperate young woman who had arrived on his doorstep that snowy Christmas Eve. She was part of the rhythm of the ranch, and the house that had felt quiet and lonely was now alive with her energy. Life had grown comfortable, but not in a way that made it dull. Emily and Daniel shared small moments that warmed the heart, laughing over a stubborn mule that refused to enter its stall, teaching each other small tricks for the chores, and sharing quiet conversations by the fire in the evenings. They had grown closer, not in grand gestures or dramatic events, but through the steady flow of daily life. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the snow in soft gold, Emily and Daniel were repairing a fence along the back pasture. The air was crisp and clear, and Emily's cheeks were flushed from the work. She paused to catch her breath, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and looked out over the land. The open fields, the trees, the barn, and the animals. It all felt like home now. Daniel stood nearby, hammering a post into place, and glanced at her. You've come a long way, he said quietly. I've never seen anyone pick up ranch work so quickly. Emily smiled, feeling a warmth that wasn't from the sun. I've had a good teacher, she replied, and I wanted to prove that I could belong here, that I could help. Daniel nodded. He had been thinking about something for days, weighing it in his mind. The question of marriage, the one she had asked him months ago, had not left him. Desperate, he realized that it wasn't just about her presence on the ranch. It was about the connection that had grown between them, the trust and respect they had built, and the companionship they had found in each other. As they finished the fence, Emily wiped her hands and sat on a log, looking tired but satisfied. Daniel approached her and sat beside her in silence for a moment. Then he spoke, carefully, almost hesitantly.
Emily, do you remember what you asked me that first Christmas Eve?
Emily nodded, her heart beating faster. She remembered the fear she had felt, the risk of asking him, and the uncertainty that had followed.
Yes, she said softly. Daniel took a deep breath. I thought about it a lot. I've lived alone for a long time and I wasn't sure if I wanted to open my life again. But watching you, seeing how you've become part of this ranch, part of this life, I realize that I already rely on you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. And I think I would like that, if you still want it. Psst. Emily's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and relief flooding her. She had worked, waited, and hoped, and now it seemed that her courage had brought her to this moment. Breath. Daniel, I do, she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. I still want it. I want to stay, not just for the work, not just for safety, but because I feel like this is where I belong. With you. Daniel smiled faintly, a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. It was small, but genuine, and it carried with it a quiet joy. Then Let's do it, he said.
Let's take that step together. Not because it's easy, but because it feels right.
The snow began to fall again lightly that evening, covering the ranch in a fresh layer of white. They went inside, sharing a simple meal by the fire. There were no grand celebrations, no large gathering of people. The warmth of the house, the glow of the fire, and the presence of each other were enough. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams, hopes, and small plans for the future. Over the next weeks, their life continued in the rhythm they had built. Emily handled the daily chores, learned more about the animals, and became familiar with every corner of the ranch. Daniel, who had spent so many years alone, discovered the joy of sharing work, responsibilities, and quiet moments with someone he trusted completely. They grew to understand each other's habits, preferences, and strengths. The house, once silent and empty, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the small sounds of shared life. Neighbors and friends who came to the ranch noticed the change too. They saw Emily moving confidently among the animals, working alongside Daniel and handling herself with a quiet strength. Daniel, who had been reserved and private, seemed lighter, more relaxed, and even smiled more easily when Emily was around. Their bond was visible in the way they coordinated chores, shared meals, and even joked together over small mishaps around the ranch. Spring began to bloom, and with it came new life. The fields softened with green, the animals became more active, and the ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. Emily and Daniel worked together planting vegetables, repairing fences, and preparing the land for the coming months. Every task they completed side by side strengthened the trust between them. Emily's confidence grew, and Daniel's heart opened further, realizing that life could still offer second chances, even after years of solitude. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with soft orange and pink hues, Daniel took Emily's hand. They walked together to the porch, looking out over the fields. "Emily," he said, "I know we didn't rush anything before, but now I want you to know that this isn't just about work or surviving the winter. This is about us, about building a life together. If you still want to be with me, I want you to stay as my partner, my wife, my family." She had come so far, from wandering alone in the snow, to this moment of warmth, trust, and love.
"I want that," she whispered.
"I've wanted that for a long time. I'm so happy you feel the same." They embraced, the winter wind brushing against the house, the stars beginning to shine above, and the warmth of the fire in the ranch filling them both with a quiet contentment. It wasn't a story of grand gestures or dramatic events. It was simple, steady, and real. It was built on trust, effort, and the courage to ask for something meaningful. The following months were filled with shared life. Emily and Daniel continued to work the ranch together, care for the animals, and maintain the house. They shared quiet meals, worked long hours, and laughed over small mishaps. Emily brought new energy and ideas to the ranch, while Daniel provided wisdom, guidance, and a steady hand. Their life wasn't perfect. There were challenges, long days, and hard work, but it was fulfilling, warm, and full of companionship. By the next Christmas, the ranch looked different. Lights hung from the porch. The house smelled of baked bread and warm stew, and the fields sparkled with frost in the morning sun. Emily and Daniel shared a small celebration, reflecting on the year and the journey that had brought them together. They didn't need a big crowd or expensive gifts. Their presence for each other, the home they had built together, and the love that had grown quietly over months were enough. Looking back, Emily remembered the cold night when she had knocked on Daniel's door, desperate and afraid. Breath. She had begged for warmth, and he had offered it without hesitation. What began as a desperate plea for shelter had grown into a life filled with trust, work, laughter, and love. It had taken courage to ask for more, patience to wait, and effort to prove her worth. But it had been worth every moment. Daniel, too, reflected on the months that had passed. He realized that opening his home and heart to Emily had changed everything. The house was no longer silent and lonely. It was alive, warm, and shared. He had learned that even after years of solitude, life could still bring joy, companionship, and love, if one was willing to take a chance. And so, the ranch continued, full of life, love, and the quiet strength that comes from shared effort and trust. Emily and Daniel worked together, laughed together, and built a future together. Their story became a reminder that sometimes life's coldest nights can lead to the warmest homes, and that courage, honesty, and patience can open doors that desperation alone never could. On that snowy Christmas morning, as the first light touched the frost-covered fields, Emily and Daniel stood together on the porch, hand in hand, looking out over the ranch. The storm was far behind them now, the warmth of the home, the rhythm of their work, and the bond they had built promised a future filled not with loneliness, but with trust, companionship, and love. And for both of them, that was everything.